Hey y'all, from Spindle Mountain Mercantile. I am Heather. Welcome to my YouTube channel.
Hey everybody! This is my life.
If you want to see more fun outtakes, stay tuned to the end of the video.
In today's video, I'm decorating 2 pots I bought at Big Lots. I'm a poet and I don't even know it. They started out kind of the same. They're the same shape, a little bit different size, and they're different colors, but I decorated them completely different. One of them I decorated in my own style. The other one is probably more for a minimalist. So I picture the second one to be in somebody's house that's really clean and has muted colors, and perhaps they grow succulents. So not my house. This is where succulents go to die. That pot is the second project in this video, but it's actually the first one I decorated, and I did it a couple of months ago before I really knew what I was doing. I did not put primer on it, and you guys, that's a huge mistake. I should have put shellac on it, or ideally I should have used Debbie's DIY Salvation Solution. Almost as soon as I was finished with it, it scratched. I just set it aside because I was discouraged. And then I kept moving it around in my she-shack to get it out of the way. So of course it got more and more scratched. Well, last week I thought, you know what, I'm gonna fix this. So I thought the best way to fix it was just, if you can't beat them, join them. I added more scratches. I made it look more messed up. And now it looks like all of that was intentional. It turned out so good, and I sealed it. I gave it the scratch test afterwards. It's in awesome condition. Somebody will love having this. If you guys make mistakes, don't fret. Just fix them if you can, and if you can't, move on. Those mistakes are going to get you closer to the project that makes your heart happy and brings you joy. So without further ado, let's get on with the video. Say bye, Hamlet. Bye.
Project number 1. From the moment I saw this blue pot, I knew I would decorate it for me. I love blue willow dishes and everything blue and white in decor. I learned my lesson, so I sprayed it with shellac and let it dry. Then I got out my Iron Orchid Designs air dry clay and 3 different molds. I'm using Trimmings 3, Felicity, and Persephone. I started by dusting my molds with cornstarch and spreading it out with a fan brush. I did 1 mold at a time, but if you want, you can fill the entire surface with clay and do all of the molds at the same time. In each design, I like to use 1 piece of clay, and that reduces cracking. IOD molds have a little rim around each design, and it's called a micro rim. It's almost like having a knife when you're done and you need to wipe off your clay. You simply rub your fingers across it with your clay at the same time, and it just kind of cuts it off. It's brilliant. The cornstarch helps your clay release from the mold. Gravity helps too, but every once in a while you have to use your fingertip just to get it started. I got the whole stem out with that little piece, but you wouldn't believe how many times I break them. Ironically, I cut it off later in the design. Figures, right? I'm showing you this part just to remind you and to emphasize that you want to use 1 continuous piece when you have a long mold. That way it's less likely to crack. Continuing on, I used Trimmings 3 to make the part of the trim that goes around the top and the bottom of my flower pot. After I was done, I realized I didn't need to use 1 continuous piece of this because I want this pot to look really, really old. So it actually would have been good if I had different pieces that were cracked. But fortunately for me, I dropped the pot so many times while I was working on it, it cracked anyway. So hey, win-win. I used 2 different molds for this, but you can use anything you want. In fact, you can use anything you want on the whole entire surface. You can use as much as you want or as little as you want. Around the edge, you might want to tape measure it. I just eyeball it. And if I have any left at the end, I just add that back to my air dry clay and I can use it next time. To attach my molds to my flower pot, I use Tite Bond Quick and Thick. I've never had an issue with this adhering to any surface on which I've ever used it. A lot of times I put it right on the mold and then I use a brush to spread it around to the edges, but with this one I decided just to put it right onto the flower pot and it worked very well. If you add glue right where the ends meet, it won't look cracked, but remember, I want mine to look really aged and cracked, so I didn't put glue right there. Usually when I'm done gluing my molds to my project, I put tape over it so it won't slide down. But since this is on the bottom edge of the flower pot, I didn't have to worry about that because it's not going to slide anywhere. Both Persephone and Felicity are very deep molds. I didn't want the face to be very thick though, so I didn't fill it all the way. And it was a little bit too tall to fit on the flower pot if I wanted to add the trim around the top and the bottom. So I didn't fill it in all the way at the bottom either. In fact, when I got done with it, I cut some of that off. I did leave a little lock of hair at the back of her neck, and when I was done, I turned it over and added Tite Bond to the back and brushed it to the edges with a little paintbrush. So as soon as I got her on my flower pot, Persephone just slid right down. I should have had my tape ready, but I forgot. So I got my tape out, cut a whole bunch of pieces, and just put it over her face. I like to use wide tape. If you use thin tape, it makes more notches. I mean, you're going to have notches when you use wide tape, but there's not as many. And by notches, I mean the part where the edge of the tape pushes into the mold. You don't want to put it pressed down on the mold. You want it to be like a sling, like it's just kind of laying in the tape. The parts of the tape you want really adhered are to the object on which you're putting the mold. So I want my tape to be really stuck to this flower pot, but not necessarily stuck to the mold. And let me tell you, I used a lot of stinking tape on this thing, and then I laid it on top of something so that it was laying flat, and she still moved. So the next morning I had to reattach her. She wasn't quite all the way dry before I caught it. And now I'm just cleaning off some of the glue and I'm going to start attaching. Oh, and the paint right there you see, I made sure that the paint worked on the shellac and it sure as shooting did. So I kept going. Now I'm attaching the Felicity rose molds and I'm making her have like a scarf with this part. I just moved it around until I found the exact place I wanted it to be, and then I attached the roses all around her, and here's what that looked like. I put the molding around the top rim and I used lots of little pieces to tape it up because I used lots of pieces of trim so that it would look old and be cracked. And because of that, I used a lot of small pieces of trim around the top rim, and then I used a lot of different pieces of tape on those to hold them in place. Now, a lot of people paint their clay before it's dry so that it won't crack. I don't know what you would do in this situation because obviously if you paint it and you put tape over it, it's not going to work. So that's kind of a different thing than what I'm doing today. Alrighty, moving on. I waited till the next day when the clay was dry and I took it outside and spray painted all of the clay with the closest blue spray paint with a sealer I could find that matched the color of the flower pot. Funny story, we took a special trip into town to find that color, and when I got home, it did not match. I was so frustrated we had to go back to town. I started cleaning, and in a box of spray paint I hadn't yet put away, I found the right color. When it was completely dry, I got out my Debbie's Design Diary DIY paint in the color beadboard and I covered just the parts of the flower pot that I attached molds to. Since I wanted it to get way down in all the crevices and nooks and crannies, I used different sizes of paintbrush depending on what area I was working on. I waited for it to completely dry and then I added another coat. This next part, I'm not sure what to tell you about the product because I got this in my last haul. It's this stuff that makes your paint look like sand and you put it right on your sheetrock. So it's like mini popcorn ceiling paint. It's probably from the 90s. Seriously. I mean, this was like a really old haul. You could probably find something very similar at the hardware store or online, and you can use baking soda or the product called Salt Wash. Those are both great, but they're not quite as sandy as this. And I really like the way this texture laid down on the surface. To make this mixture, I just put it in a cup with some of the beadboard paint and I kept adding it until I got the consistency I thought would work best. I want this to be kind of like cement, so I started by dabbing it because that's how I was taught to make the cement look. But I almost immediately realized that that wasn't cutting it with this. It was too popcorn ceiling-y, if you know what I'm talking about. So I started swiping it with brush strokes, and that worked perfectly. I went back over the parts I had first dabbed and made those look all the same all the way around it. I put this on every flat surface that didn't have any of the clay on it. I let it sit and get super dry. It probably took about 2 hours, and then I added a second coat. I only used paint for the second coat though. I didn't have any of the sand mixture in that. After that was dry, I took out a little paintbrush and just filled in the peaks and valleys of any places I might have missed the first two go-arounds. In this one, I also did not add any sand. Debbie's paint is highly pigmented, so you could probably get away with even just one coat, but I wanted to make sure I started with a completely white surface before I did the next step. And now the fun begins. Of course, at the time I didn't know I was going to have fun because I was kind of a little afraid. Y'all, I was so sure after my first disaster that the paint was just gonna fall off as soon as I started distressing it. I decided to not use sandpaper because obviously, and I'm wet distressing. Instead of using a damp towel or a wet wipe though, I'm just spraying directly on the paint that I want to distress. This was way easier than I anticipated, and let me clarify what I mean by easy. I'm saying that it wasn't complicated or difficult brain power wise to figure out how to do this. Elbow grease talking though, it was not easy. It took a lot of physical work to get this done. That stuff is really durable, but that's a good thing because it makes me think that this flower pot will last a very long time, especially after I get it sealed. This thing is going to last like forever. I'm not going to bore you with this entire process because I'm sure you get the gist by now. On the entire flower pot, I did the same process whether I was working with an area that had molds or that did not. I did notice at one point that my cloth was leaving some color on the paint, so I switched out my cloth and I got out a paintbrush and just dabbed a little bit of white in those areas, and that fixed it. This flower pot is the perfect example of why I do not include the time I spent on a project when I figure out the price I'm going to sell it for in my booth. If I did that, I would have to sell this for like $873. I am not kidding y'all. It took forever. Just the wet distress part took me over 2 hours, and that doesn't include the molds or the painting or the shopping or anything else. It was worth it though, because I'm keeping it and it's gorgeous. Because I want this to last forever, and also because I'm still a little paranoid because of that other project, I'm using Debbie's Big Top After Show. This is an excellent sealer that is super durable. I'm applying one coat with my favorite paintbrush and I'm making sure to wipe up the drips as I go. I'm going to let this dry and then I'm going to add a second coat. For the surfaces that don't have any clay molds on them, I'm using my big paintbrush I found on Amazon. It is awesome. I love this paintbrush. I use it a lot for wax. I use it for all kinds of things. In the description, I will include a link to that and other items I use that I found on Amazon. If you buy anything from them by using my links to get there, I will get a small compensation, but it won't raise your price. Now, here as a reminder of what I started with, a great big blue pot I found at Big Lots. And here's what I've created. Oh my goodness, you guys, this is so squeal worthy. I love this. I cannot wait until I can do a video redecorating my front porch so I can show you how I'm going to style it permanently. Project number 2. And now for the flower pot that almost broke my heart just a little bit. It's just like the other one, just a little bit smaller and a little greener. I'm using Iron Orchid Designs Dewdrop Pond to make the molds, and I'm making them with their air dry clay. Because we've already learned this part, we're going to zip right through the making of the molds. Because I want the design to center around the frog, I put him on first. I applied him with Tite Bond Quick and Thick, and then I started adding in some fern leaves. This mold only has one design of fern leaves, so to break them up from being so repetitive, I made several different molds of the same leaves, and then I cut them up into different sizes. I added them in different directions behind different items on the flower pot, and I also turned and twisted some. So if they were straight, I bent them. If they were bent, I straightened them. I just wanted it to look like they were all different leaves. When every fern leaf was in place, it was time to start adding all the little critters. I went over every mold on the flower pot and made sure they were adhered all over. So around the edges, in the middle, I pressed everything. And it's a good thing I did that because remember I warned you how everything got scratched up at the end? Well, none of the molds came off, so it was a good thing I did this part. Next, I gave it 2 good coats, letting the first one dry, using Debbie's Design Diary DIY paint in the color Faded Burlap, and immediately I noticed the scratches. So I gave up and set it aside. I didn't even save the film from that. I was so disappointed. So 2 weeks later, I picked it up. Here's the scratches, and I decided I'm just going to go with it. So I started scratching it some more with my 220 grit sandpaper. I went over all of the scratches that were already there and just tried to make them not look so straight. So I just added a little depth to them. And then I went to places where it didn't have any scratches and I just started going to town. I did avoid the molds because the only thing under the paint is the white clay, and if I wipe off that paint, the only thing that will show is the white clay. On the bigger parts of the pot, I started spraying the pot and I used a big huge Brillo pad to wet distress, again, avoiding the molds. I didn't want to have all of this distressing and then have the molds like perfectly solid in faded burlap, so I decided to add some color to them. I did not have this color at home. I do think Debbie has a color that would fit pretty good, but it was at my shop and the shop was closed. So I got out all my old paint. I've been trying to get rid of stuff, so this worked out really good. Look how old this is. It doesn't even come out. Hello. Once I got a whole bunch of different colors in this cup mixed with a little bit of faded burlap, I used my milk frother. It's rechargeable and I found it on Amazon. And I just kept mixing until I got the right tone. I put in a lot of yellows and different greens, and I kept putting the little tub of paint into the flower pot until I got this. And I think I did pretty good. I'm a regular paint mixologist now. So I got out a tiny paintbrush, not tiny, just a smaller size paintbrush, and started going over just the top surface of the molds. I was still kind of concerned. And then I was like, what am I thinking? I shouldn't be concerned. What's going to happen? I'm going to ruin it and I have to start all over like again or just donate it. So I wiped it off each time I put some paint on in a new spot. And then I thought, let's just go for it. And I started putting it everywhere. I mean, not everywhere. I didn't put it on the big flat parts, but I started putting it around the outsides of the molds onto where they are attached to the flower pot. I thought that would look more natural. And here's the look I wanted to achieve. So if this was an old clay pot that somebody painted green eons ago, and then maybe a couple of eons later, they painted it with something that looked like faded burlap, and then they left it outside and it was in the weather and the rain, and it just kept getting worn and worn and worn so that the faded burlap came off and showed the green. That's what I wanted it to look like. When I was done wiping it off, I used, this is a wet wipe I'm using right here, and you can see there's a lot of paint on it. I just took it and I wiped the entire surface of the flower pot. I thought that would make it look a little bit more natural. And then it was ready to add clear wax. So of course I used Debbie's wax because it's the best. And I coated the entire surface everywhere I had painted it. I used my other wax brush to wipe that down, and then I left it overnight to get super dry. Of course, it wasn't dingy enough for something that had been out for eons, so I got out Debbie's wax in the color black, and I started putting that stuff all over the molds, and then I wiped it down. Again, I realized I was afraid, and there was absolutely nothing to be afraid of. So I started going over the entire surface with that black wax. Because I used clear wax underneath it and let it dry completely, that helps to be able to pull more of the black wax off if I get too much on there. And that's exactly what I kept doing. I just kept putting black wax on and wiping it off, putting it on, wiping it off, until I got the desired look that I was hoping to achieve. And you guys, I love it so much. I cannot believe this was a big fat mistake. You know how I'm always telling y'all, if you make a lot of mistakes, just keep going because eventually you'll get to the product that makes your heart happy and brings you joy? Well, that's what this one did for me. This might be one of the best mistakes I've ever made. This is usually when I ask you which project you liked the best. And even though I made this one for me specifically, I think I like the other one just as much. I'm not sure why. Maybe it's because it caused me so many different emotions and there were so many mistakes and it turned out so great despite those mistakes, or because of them. Or maybe it's just because I like dragonflies and hummingbirds and frogs. I'm not sure, but whatever the reason, I like them both. I truly appreciate each and every one of you who stick with me through these videos and make comments and like and share my content. Until you see me next time, I hope you have a wonderful week. Don't forget to stay tuned for the outtakes. And as always, I hope you are blessed. Bye.
I have to keep starting my video over because I'm being interrupted. I am so loved. Hi, Tilly Bell. Oh, be nice. I can have more than one dog. I got two hands. I don't really have two hands at work. That's my surgery, but this is Rufus. And here comes Hamlet. Are you jealous? What's he doing? You know what's awesome about Hamlet? If he wants to give me kisses, but his tongue's been places I don't want near my face. His kisses are misses if I'm on this side. Poor baby. We have to shave his face so that his hair won't get into his eyes. So guess what happens then? His tongue now flaps in his eyeball. It's a lose-lose situation. What's happening here? How about that? Whoa. I did. Oh, you're so sweet. Hey, everybody. Happy spring. Today I am up styling